Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding the complex global landscape. Today, we're plunging into a really critical and often misunderstood aspect of Middle East dynamics. Where exactly does China stand on the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran? This isn't simple. Our sources show Beijing walking this, well, delicate diplomatic tightrope between Tehran and Tel Aviv. Significant trade routes, huge energy interest, its growing regional influence. It's all hanging in the balance. We've sifted through the latest analysis to pull out the key nuggets, giving you a clear path to understanding Beijing's strategy. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what's truly illuminating here is that China's position isn't just about picking a side, right? It's a pretty sophisticated blend of pragmatic economic interest, long-term geopolitical strategy, and frankly, a deeply rooted desire for stability in a region that's, well, anything but stable. So our mission for this deep dive is to go beyond just what China says or does. We want to really dig into why it chooses those actions and what the implications are for this ongoing, escalating conflict that has everyone on edge.
Okay, so let's start with China's immediate diplomatic stance. Its condemnation of recent events and these consistent calls for de-escalation. Our sources highlight how Israel, under Prime Minister Netanyahu, is described as redefining the rules of engagement, carrying out attacks on Iran with, quote, little regard for international law or global opinion.
Strong words.
Yeah, and there's a striking parallel drawn here, one that Beijing certainly wouldn't miss. The source observes that Israel framing these strikes as preemptive measures against Iran's alleged nuclear ambitions, it echoes Washington's 2003 Iraq invasion narrative, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing.
Right, which obviously proved unfounded.
Exactly. That's a powerful historical echo. So if Israel's actions are drawing that kind of comparison, how does that translate into China's official response? What's their core concern?
Well, that parallel to 2003 is indeed crucial, and it really informs Beijing's perspective. China views this ongoing vilification of Iran-driven, let's be clear, by both the U.S. and Israel as dangerous narrative warfare, basically. They see it potentially laying the groundwork, creating a pretext for a much broader military conflict. And that's a profound concern for them. Such a conflict would destabilize a region absolutely vital to its economic lifelines, its Belt and Road Initiative, everything.
So stability is paramount.
Absolutely. So China's responded with a very clear, very framed stance. Their foreign ministry has openly condemned what they called repeated violations of Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and actions that risk inflaming tensions across the region. That's the official line. Chinese officials have consistently voiced deep concern about the fallout from Israeli military operations. They're urging all parties towards diplomatic and political solutions, warning explicitly that escalation serves no one. Beijing's also put itself forward, expressing a concrete willingness to help de-escalate, offering mediation.
And didn't we see this at the UN recently?
Yes, exactly. It was powerfully reinforced at a recent emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Ambassador Fu Kong denounced Israel's military adventurism. He directly linked it to the ongoing occupation of Gaza, calling that a humanitarian disaster. Stark language. And while he didn't directly name the U.S., Fu's comments were, well, implicitly but unmistakably urging Washington to rein in Israeli aggression. It reflects China's broader critique of what it sees as unilateral actions undermining global stability.
And the stark contrast in how Beijing handled those recent calls with Tehran versus Tel Aviv, that really brings China's priorities into sharp focus, doesn't it? Our sources highlight how, just over one weekend, Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke with counterparts in both Iran and Israel. And the tone, completely different.
Precisely. The difference in tone is very revealing. It shows the depth of China's calculations. In his call with Iran's Saeed Abbas Araqi, Wang unequivocally condemned what he called Israel's reckless attacks. And here's a critical detail. He specifically warned that strikes on nuclear facilities set a dangerous and unacceptable precedent. That's specific. He stressed these actions violate the UN Charter, basic international law, essentially framing Israel's actions as a serious breach of global norms.
Okay, so that's the call with Iran. What about Israel?
Right. So in his subsequent call with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, Wang adopted a more restrained tone, still critical but restrained. He urged Israel to abandon military solutions and return to diplomacy, framing it more as a pragmatic necessity for regional stability rather than, a direct legal condemnation like with Iran. So in this whole crisis, China's made its position pretty clear. It fundamentally backs Iran's stance here, opposing any military path to resolving the nuclear issue.
And that fits their broader policy, right?
Absolutely. It aligns perfectly with Beijing's long-held diplomatic posture. They recognize Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, but they firmly oppose any move toward actual nuclear weapons. Ultimately, China envisions a nuclear-free Middle East. Any proliferation is seen as a threat to its regional plans and, well, global order generally.
Well, this isn't just about recent events or these carefully worded calls. There's a much deeper strategic alignment with Iran going back years. What's the historical context, the economic context? What really shapes this relationship for Beijing?
Yeah, that's really the core of it. Iran, you have to remember, has repeatedly said it doesn't seek nuclear weapons, and it was a supporter of the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which, as you know, collapsed after the U.S. pulled out under Trump. Now, with Trump potentially returning, there are growing fears about renewed U.S. threats. Military action unless Tehran complies with even broader U.S. demands. And both China and Russia firmly oppose that kind of unilateral approach. They see it as undermining international law. In fact, just recently, Beijing hosted a trilateral meeting. Deputy foreign ministers from China, Iran, and Russia met in March. Their goal was to reaffirm support for a multilateral JCPOA-based solution and denounce what they term illegal sanctions on Iran. A clear signal.
So diplomatic solidarity. But it goes beyond that.
Oh, much beyond. This diplomatic support is part of a much broader, more tangible strategic alignment. In 2021, they signed that landmark 25-year cooperation agreement. And this wasn't just a trade deal. It was effectively China securing a strategic energy lifeline in exchange for long-term economic collaboration. It's huge. It covers everything. Trade, infrastructure, think railways, ports, telecoms, energy, tech, defense, even education.
Wow, comprehensive.
Very. It's Beijing cementing Iran as a critical node in its Belt and Road strategy. It gives them stable access to resources, expands their influence, regardless of sanctions. And despite those punishing U.S. sanctions, China remains Iran's top trading partner, by far its largest buyer of crude oil. We're talking maybe as much as 90% of Iran's exports. That's a staggering figure. Shows the depth of their economic interdependence.
90%.
Yeah. And beyond economics, they also conduct joint military exercises, like the Marine Security Belt drills with Russia launched back in 2019. These focus on things like anti-piracy, search and rescue, demonstrating interoperability, sending a clear message about their defense ties.
And this fits into Iran's own strategy, too.
Exactly. This entire partnership reflects Iran's long-standing look-east strategy. First introduced by President Ahmadinejad, it's all about deepening ties with non-Western powers like China and Russia, and it's yielded tangible results. Joint initiatives and, significantly, Iran joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, in 2023. SCO membership further integrates Iran into this powerful Eurasian security and economic bloc, moving it away from Western influence and strengthening Beijing's own strategic pivot.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of a deep, growing strategic partnership.
Yeah.
But while China clearly backs Iran in many fundamental ways, our sources indicate this support isn't unlimited. It has boundaries. What are those red lines for Beijing? What could potentially disrupt this really vital alignment?
That's a crucial distinction, yeah. And it highlights the pragmatic core of China's foreign policy. It's not ideological, it's practical. There are indeed clear limits. For instance, if Tehran were to do something drastic like block the Strait of Hormuz, well, that's a critical choke point. Over 25% of global oil, a third of LNG shipments pass through there. China's direct economic interests would be severely threatened. That's an absolute red line. Beijing needs those energy flows.
Okay, so Hormuz is one. What else?
Well, likewise, if Iran were to withdraw from the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that would significantly challenge China's commitment to multilateralism and the international legal order. A framework Beijing actively promotes, you see. It's central to its global image. And a closer economic and military alignment between Tehran and Beijing could also strain China's already fraught relations with Washington, especially if it involves significant, high-end arms deals that directly challenge U.S. security interests in the region. That could be a problem.
Because China wants to be seen as a responsible actor.
Exactly. Beijing always prefers to cast itself as a responsible global player committed to diplomacy de-escalation. That image is central to its expanding footprint in the Middle East. I mean, its role in brokering that 2023 rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that was a milestone for them, positioning China as a constructive force.
But their influence isn't absolute, even with Iran.
No, definitely not. It's important to note that despite the partnership, China's influence over Tehran remains limited. Iran is an independent actor, its own interests, long history of strategic autonomy. So Beijing's interests are vulnerable not just to Israeli actions, but also potential missteps by Iran itself. Our sources actually highlight that Iran's response to recent provocations has been relatively restrained, perhaps deliberately so.
Interesting. Why restrained?
Well, following the tragic death of President Raisi back in May 2024, Iran's leadership seemed to move slightly closer to engaging with the West, a period of perceived vulnerability, perhaps. That shift was then followed by a wave of quite assertive Israeli operations, damaging strikes against Hezbollah and Hamas, an expanded Israeli presence in Syria, and then in October, a direct hit on Iran's missile and air defense systems, potentially paving the way for deeper attacks.
And Tehran didn't lash out.
Their reaction was quite muted, yeah. It may have been a cautious effort to avoid a full-scale war, understandable. But, and this is a key point from the sources it carries, the significant risk of emboldening its adversaries. And for both Beijing and Moscow, who are each navigating their own intense rivalries with Washington, the observation is pretty clear. In today's volatile geopolitical landscape, hesitation, especially in the face of perceived aggression, can sometimes be more dangerous than outright defiance. It might invite further pressure.
So pulling this all together, what we've really unpacked today is China's incredibly complex balancing act in this Israel-Iran conflict. It's a strategic dance, isn't it? Between shrewd economic self-interest, a fundamental desire for regional stability, and this evolving kind of assertive global diplomatic role. At its core, China's consistent push is for diplomacy, for de-escalation, strongly opposing military solutions, while at the same time deepening its strategic partnership with Iran across multiple fronts.
Absolutely. This deep dive truly shows us that China's position isn't simply about picking a side, not at all. It's really about navigating a future where its own prosperity, its own global influence, are deeply tied to the stability or instability of this highly volatile region. And given that observation from our sources, that hesitation can be more dangerous than defiance in the current climate, it raises a powerful question for you, the listener, to think about. How might China's future actions, or perhaps its inactions, shape the trajectory of this conflict, especially if its own vital economic interests become more directly and undeniably threatened? It's a lot to consider. And the situation is constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A critical situation to watch. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep being curious about the world around you. Until next time.